I'm reluctant to point the fingers at anybody,
Sure.
particularly the two guys that can't answer for themselves now. And I suspect that the investigators will have more cockpit voice and other data that they haven't included at this point. But it is a very, very strange situation. And although, as you know, I've written a book about the causes of aircraft crashes, I've never come across anything quite like this one.
We've been reporting for you this morning on this preliminary report into the Air India crash last month, which reveals that switches which control fuel flow to the engines were turned off, seemingly by one of the pilots. A cockpit recording has also been recovered, which suggests the other pilot in the cockpit questioned the move just before the crash. All but one of the 242 passengers and crew died, as well as dozens of other people on the ground. Air India are continuing to cooperate fully with the investigation. The full report will emerge at some time in the next few months. Terry Tozer is a former pilot, and he joins us now. Good morning, Terry.
Good morning.
Thanks so much for speaking to us. So, we need to understand, first of all, I think, what we are talking about here when we talk about these switches, these engine fuel control switches. Tell us how they are operated.
Well, they're both latched switches, so they have to be lifted before they can be activated and turned either to cut off or to run, which means it supplies the fuel to the engines. There is some question as to whether or not that latch mechanism was activated in this particular aircraft. I haven't seen anything that says it was not. They merely mention in the report that on some Boeing aircraft, the latch mechanism was deactivated, that it was an advisory fix, but not a mandatory one. It doesn't actually say clearly whether this aircraft had them activated or not, but I suppose one have to assume that they were operating as originally intended in the design.
For clarity, for those of us who are not familiar with cockpits, Terry, these are manually operated, i.e. by a person. It has to be done by a human being. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. With that in mind, then, this preliminary report is pointing at some sort of pilot error.
Not a phrase I ever use because we all make errors. It's a question of human factors, which there's a lot of training and research involved in aviation. And it's either somebody has done it by mistake or they've done it deliberately for reasons unknown. It's a very odd thing to do unintentionally. The latching mechanism is there to prevent you doing it by mistake, by kind of knocking your coffee over and grabbing the switch by mistake. But there still remains unanswered questions. The one pilot questions the other as to why fuel cut off, and he says, "I didn't." So the mystery remains, really.
With that in mind, what about that interaction between the two? Could these switches be adjusted without the other person present noticing? And as a sort of supplementary question to that, could the second person stop somebody taking the action, theoretically, if they wanted to?
Well, I imagine that the answer is probably yes to both of those. But I mean, they're simple toggle switches. It would take a nanosecond to flick them off. You've got to lift them up first. And what is notable is that somebody switched them back to their correct position instantly, very, very quickly, which is the correct action. And the aircraft then performed as it was intended to, because there is a sequence for non-normal actions with the 787 that were you to have a problem with an engine, you could cycle those switches to off and back to on again. And that would initiate a sequence to restart the engine. And that's exactly what happened with both engines. The number one, the left engine, started to spool up. The second one started to relight, but they basically ran out of time before they delivered any more thrust.
Just on that, Terry, that's interesting. So there is a procedure by which this is kind of, there's a context in which this sort of action might be considered normal. Would that be in flight, or are we talking about on the ground?
Well, it would be part of the ground start sequence in all probability, but in flight, yes. If you had an engine failure, there is a very long checklist about what you do, but one of the actions would be to cycle these switches to off and then back to run again, and that automatically initiates the start sequence.
But presumably this was in the immediate sort of takeoff procedure and part of this very short flight, obviously. So would that be considered normal to be cycling the engines, when you're merely feet off the ground?
Absolutely not.
So it's something that perhaps might be more likely in, for example, when you're cruising and an engine starts.
Well,
playing
if you had an engine failure, you would initiate the appropriate emergency drill.
Sure.
That might be part of it. What we don't get from the report is that there was any sign of engine failure prior to the switches being moved.
Gosh, it's quite distressing, isn't it, to read this? How did you feel when you got the findings? And it is the preliminary report. There's a lot that we still want answers on, and hopefully the full report will deliver it. But when you heard this, how did you first feel as a former pilot?
I was pretty shocked. The implication is that somebody did this consciously. I'm reluctant to point the fingers at anybody, particularly the two guys that can't answer for themselves now. And I suspect that the investigators will have more cockpit voice and other data that they haven't included at this point. But it is a very, very strange situation. And although, as you know, I've written a book about the causes of aircraft crashes, I've never come across anything quite like this one.
Yeah. Terry, thank you very much. It's very good to hear from you and to get your clarity. Terry Tozer, former pilot, speaking about the preliminary report into the Air India crash. Notably, the Airline Pilots Association of India has reacted to this report, saying they're concerned actually about the way the investigation's being handled, that they're surprised at the secrecy surrounding these investigations, and they actually allege that suitably qualified personnel were not taken on board for the investigation. They say, we feel it's being driven in a direction presuming the guilt of pilots, and we strongly object to this line of thought. Preliminary reports are helpful to an extent, I suppose, but we await the full details which may emerge and hopefully will emerge in the next few months.